Okay, so the switch to momentum continues unabated. Nintendo put out a special direct for Donkey Kong Bananza yesterday, from our perspective. First proper look at the game, I've got to say it looked completely different and much more fleshed out compared to the actual demo that we played, which was very simplistic compared to what we saw here. Looks promising. Certainly looks as though they've thrown the kitchen sink at it. There's so much going on there. It was a bit overwhelming, I thought. But Oliver, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was quite taken by this demo in some respects, but I think it's tempered a little bit by some longer format gameplay that I've seen of the title, both in the demo and in the Nintendo Treehouse segment they published a couple of months ago. So graphically speaking, this looks a lot like Mario Odyssey to me. In my view, it looks quite similar to Mario Odyssey, both in terms of the engine technology and in terms of the graphical techniques that are being used. I would be pretty surprised if this wasn't one of Nintendo's in-house engines at the very least, if not an in-house development team with a Nintendo EPD or something similar. Compared to something like Odyssey, though, I was just playing some Odyssey earlier to get a feel for it. This is much denser. There's lots of foliage. There's large environments with lots of foes. This is stuff we didn't really see in Odyssey, right? Which itself was an early Switch 1 title. The art and animation here is top-notch. There's so much polish in every animation, every weapon swing, every particle effect. It's that classic Nintendo polish. Character designs, like for the foes, for the allies, they're very animated, they're very expressive, they're very exciting looking. That's quite special there. And one thing I really like is that all the attacks are punctuated by bits of like geometric bits and particles and things like that. So you really get that sense that the world is like disintegrating around you and you have that level of player interactivity and freedom that you probably would not get in most other kind of platform action games. It's interesting because this game is actually technically set underground, but if you look around, it seems like a skybox for the most part. So I think that, yeah, it's technically set underground. So the idea is that you're boring through the earth, and the kind of central conceit of the progression here is that you're kind of going from one layer inside the earth or inside this planet to another layer beneath it. And there is some indication, if you look above you, for instance, in this level that they were showing off at the Nintendo Treehouse, there's like a stream of water coming down. But outside of that, it's just kind of like blue, textureless sky. So I don't know what to make of that. In terms of resolutions here, this is a pretty hard trailer for me to count consistently. Not only is it YouTube, which is a bugbear of ours frequently, but it's also streamed. And there are no direct upload 4K feeds that I can find. So I guess it's one note to platform holders: if you do want to stream your content, please upload them separately afterwards. Nintendo has actually usually been pretty good about this. It'd be nice to have a better stream, but I did manage to find a couple of clear edges, and they counted to 1080p. With some, I think there is some DRS here, but there's no TAA or DLSS. Prior showings counted at different resolutions, sometimes a bit above 1080p. So yeah, that kind of seems to be the general run of play, at least at the moment in this early footage. Performance-wise, it's 60 FPS with some dips during special moves or animations, things like that. There were some noticeable dips in this presentation, but by and large, it was 60 FPS. I have some notes in the gameplay as well, but yeah, that's just my general impression of the graphical presentation so far. I would say it's kind of a character with a lot of other early Switch 2 titles from Nintendo, where it kind of feels like a Switch 1 game, but just more and faster in some respects. But I think that's fine. And then, of course, you have this really special destruction system, which is quite interesting. So that would be potentially quite interesting technically. But I'm still kind of waiting to see how Nintendo internalizes the 8th gen tech shifts across their games. Or if they will, broadly speaking, because like, when we're talking about techniques like TAA, really good PBR materials, things like this, SSR. We're not really seeing that in Nintendo's first party lineup of games. Probably the closest thing is actually like Luigi's Mansion 3 Out Adventure, which is a 2019 game for the Switch 1. So we're going to have to wait a little bit longer. Also, there's a curious lack of DLSS in their first party titles, unless you count Pokemon. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is a first party title, which does appear to use DLSS, but we're still waiting on that, which is kind of curious because that's like kind of one of the best features in my view of Switch 2, but they're just kind of avoiding it for the time being.
Yeah, well, I think that, DLSS does have a computational cost, and it looks like they're on the cusp with this one. They're pushing so much. that it's that there's certainly a lot going on there.
Hmm.
Obviously, I'm really interested in what you think about this, Alex. Bearing in
Yeah,
mind,
I mean, I
it's
was
something
curious
different
about
from what you
this.
usually look at.
Yeah, I mean, but I like games that at least try and do something different. So in this case, I am somewhat wondering how the world is put together exactly.
Hmm.
When you do break into the ground, one thing to notice is that like the edges on the ground itself, like you can see all the vertices, right? It's not like it's like a smooth hole or something like that. So there is geometry there. I'm just like curious, like how the world is like laid out and like what is the actual format of it. If it's like a voxel that is then converted to geometry at some point
Hmm.
and smoothed over, or what exactly it is. I'd be very curious about it. The one thing that I am a little worried about is that this is presumably they're showing the docked version of the game, and it did play out at 60, but like it was dropping pretty frequently for my
Hmm.
eyes.
Yep.
And like you'd really want a docked non-VRR display experience to keep the frame rate up to 60 as much as possible, so that you don't see that like kind of jarring, almost slow down look when every single time a particle effect pops up. I imagine the handheld experience, since it would seem to be all localized to like when things were happening, I think it probably would be a smooth GPU VRR experience that would look really great, actually.
Hmm.
Like Oliver, I wonder though why they do keep the edges so raw. I mean, sure, they are dropping frames, probably GPU related stuff when stuff is occurring, but you could run the game at like 720p, which that should be a lot faster than running the game at 1080p, for example, and then using DLSS to get it up to 1080p. And I imagine that buffer of just, even if DLSS has a higher cost on this console than it would on a PC GPU, I can
Hmm.
still imagine that buffer would make them not have to DRS as much. It would maybe get rid of a lot of the frame drops in general. I really wonder what it does take for Nintendo to start using more modern features in their games, especially when they could be so beneficial in a game like this one. But
Mm.
that's really about it. To me, it did look like Mario Odyssey quite a lot, other than the world density, like graphically, everything. It really looked a lot like that title to me.
Yeah, but the whole Red Faction guerrilla aspect of it is certainly new and certainly challenging. It's going to be really interesting to actually check out the performance levels there. But also, and I'm kind of, I don't know if it's double buffer VSync. It seems to present as such. But exactly what Alex said, what's going to happen on the handheld screen? It should be smoothed out, you'd think,
Oh,
significantly compared to what we were seeing there. Then again, they could triple buffer it, and that would help as well. I think this overall presentation goes. Let's talk about gameplay, Oliver, because there was a lot going on there. There was most of it. The presentation was about gameplay mechanics and all of the different things you can do, all of the crazy, outrageous camp stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, this is an interesting game because on the surface it looks like a platformer, and I think Nintendo even described it as such a couple times. But in reality, it's kind of this interesting destruction-based action game with these kind of sandboxy, wide open levels where you discover these banandium gems, these banana
Yeah,
gems, kind of like power moons in Mario Odyssey. And then there are some more directed gameplay segments, which maybe take the form of challenges and things like this. But it's still not 100% clear to me what the core of this game is, outside of like trying to go deeper, finding these gems, and then progressing in like these set challenges. One of my concerns here, though, is because the game is so flexible, because you have such a wide move set, because you even have skills that seem like kind of anathema to a platform game, typically. Like you have climbing in this game, which is kind of crazy. Like you've got these jumps, you can throw things, you can tear through the environment at will. Most of the environment is destructible in some form or another, and you can also climb on surfaces. So I worry that might actually limit the game by making it harder to make an interesting platformer or an action game to create challenge for the player that can't be exploited in some fashion. So I hope they provide a good balance between striking an interesting set of objectives and challenges for the player and providing the opportunity to break apart the environment in satisfying ways. I think that's a kind of a key tension here, where a traditional platformer is defined kind of by pitches between surfaces, or an action game by, a set number of foes and a limited arena in which to engage them and escape them. Here, this kind of is like blowing up everything, all those concepts. That's like a lot harder to peg in that respect. So I'm curious about that. And like I said, the progression is a bit more open-ended and more oriented towards finding things in kind of a collectathon fashion. That could be interesting. But if it's a sandbox and basically you're just slamming the ground to find the gems, tunneling through the environment to get to them, and there's no real challenge outside of just like the kind of idle task of looking for things, is that interesting? I don't know. Whereas like, at least in Mario Odyssey, it seemed like it was much more narrowly constrained in kind of interesting ways. But there are some things about this that I do like quite a bit, like the challenge levels that I mentioned, which are optional, shorter levels that take place separate from the main levels. And they seem like decent little platforming challenges where you aren't able to just tear apart the environment, like everything's made out of metal quite conspicuously. So there is at least some level here where they are trying to distinguish, here's a breakable surface, here's a non-breakable surface, and then in the middle, here's a surface that might be breakable if you have like a special power-up or something. So if they lean more towards that kind of non-breakable end of things, they could actually create interesting platform challenges. That seems like what they've done to a large extent with these challenge levels. There are also some that are like Donkey Kong Country style that are 2D, where you're like riding through a railway on a rail cart and things like this. That's also cool. I really enjoy those games. So I'm definitely curious to see how this turns out. But this footage and the prior footage does not really make it seem like it will be the thing that a lot of people want, which is like a Mario Odyssey successor, as much as it might look like it on the surface in terms of its visual techniques. This seems more open-ended and a little bit sandboxy, and maybe, like Rich kind of indicated, like kind of a hybrid between Super Mario Odyssey and Red Faction Guerrilla. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting here. I think it's interesting. Like, I kind of think that this might be a successful game on its own terms, but I don't think you can just pigeonhole it as, here is another big Nintendo platformer, or even here is another big Nintendo action game. This is something different, at least from all appearances from the Nintendo Treehouse presentation, from everything I've seen. So it's going to be interesting to see how they nail that concept, if they do nail that concept, and exactly what the player reaction will be to a game that's not really like anything that Nintendo has delivered in the past.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And it's coming out July 17th, so we don't have too long to wait. I think from my perspective, there's got to be, and I'm sure there will be, a pretty good onboarding sort of gameplay segment, because there seems to be a whole lot going on there. And when we actually had the London presentation, it was just like, oh, you can punch the scenery. But, okay, fair enough. But then you watch this presentation, and there's all manner of stuff going on. Anyway, we've got this supporter question here from Aaron Udi, and he's worried about the canon. He's worried about the Donkey Kong lore. And the question is this: good day, DFers. I presume that, not DFers.
Good day, DFers.
Good day, DFers. Have Nintendo confirmed whether the new DK is canon? Did DK get so sick of Pauline singing that he started holding her hostage at the top of a building site? I need answers. I need answers too. I mean, is Donkey Kong like the original Donkey Kong sort of set in a mirror universe? That's this.
Yeah. Well, the original Donkey Kong, infamously, Pauline is the character, the kind of damsel in distress, kind of King Kong style character who Donkey Kong has kidnapped. And in this game, she's a 13-year-old who is trying to help Donkey Kong plow through the layers of the earth. And she's a very good singer, which is part of Pauline lore. I mean, Pauline is an interesting character because she really was a character that appeared in Donkey Kong. She appeared in some of the kind of side Donkey Kong games, I believe, some of the 2D ones. Right. And then she really made a big appearance in Super Mario Odyssey, right? Which is another interesting link back to Super Mario Odyssey. She was a major character in that game, and now she's back in Donkey Kong Bananza. In the interim, she was in, put in Mario Kart, put in Super Smash Brothers Ultimate, put in all these Nintendo properties. So it does seem like this is another character that Nintendo is trying to sell here. But it's interesting they're going back to this. Yeah, I don't know exactly what would be perceived as canon. Obviously, within the Nintendo timelines of games, infamously with the Zelda games, they're kind of very messy. I would not take this too seriously. But this is maybe more accurately viewed as kind of a retcon where they're teaming up instead of being mortally opposed.
So is this possibly Donkey Kong Origins?
Yes.
I don't
It
know.
is, in terms of the timeline here, this does take place before, presumably, that original Nintendo title, Donkey Kong, does take place before
Right.
Super Mario Odyssey. So this, in terms of any timeline that you'd lay out, this is very early in whatever Nintendo timeline you would have. Yeah.